You're listening to Bark and Wag's 15-Minute Vet Talk. Each week, your host, Polly Requa, interviews veterinarians and individuals in the pet industry from across the nation answering pet questions. Bark and Wag podcast is produced weekly for your enjoyment, and show notes can be found at barkandwag.com under the podcast tab. That's barknwag.com. Please remember to subscribe to Bark and Wag 15-Minute Vet Talk.
Welcome to Bark and Wag 15-Minute Vet Talk. I'm your host, Polly Requa. Today we are talking to Kersti Nieto, trainer at Dog Training Camp USA in North Carolina. Welcome, Kersti.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Today I wanted to talk about when you have two or more dogs, and they start arguing within the household. I wanted to tell you about a story that happened yesterday. I was in Denver for a soccer tournament, and Ellie, my oldest daughter, was home with both dogs, so a black lab and a pug, and somehow they got in an argument, and Ellie came downstairs and Chuck was pretty much pinned against the wall.
Oh, no.
Yeah, and I'm not sure. Two things came to mind. One, we feed them next to each other and have never had an issue.
Yeah.
And just recently, Chuck who's the pug, has been taking little kibbles out of his dog food and placing them around the house. Like he's a pack dog feeding his tribe. And so
he'll just kind of carry his food around but leave it there?
Yeah. And so I'm not sure maybe if Maddie then, who's so food driven, went after his little dog food and then Chuck attacked him and then Maddie attacked back. Or the other, which I've seen growing up with Goldens, when one of the dogs is losing their alpha status.
Yeah.
So and that worries me because I don't know if Maddie can sense that Chuck's sick before we know he's sick.
Yeah.
So right now I have one having dinner in the kitchen and one in the mudroom. And I just wanted to get your take on, and we went on a walk today, everyone was fine. Like they all slept on the same bed. I mean, something set them off, and I just was wondering what you do, especially when you are taking care of multiple dogs. Yeah.
Well, one thing to think about is like things are back to normal. So usually if dogs have like a squabble or whatever, they have a little tussle, they don't think about it. Like everything happens and then they just go right back to whatever. So life carries on. So that's normal that, they wouldn't really be having any issues right now, and that's actually a good thing because when it's a really serious fight, then most of the time the dogs don't go back to normal. So that's a good thing.
Okay.
And as far as Chuck getting old, how old is Chuck and how
He's
old is
11.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes dogs can sense, it's not necessarily that they're sick, it could be, but more it's like, okay, you're getting older and who are you to tell me what to do? So sometimes as the younger dog comes of age, they kind of like that competition sort of arises, and it could be happening very subtly within your pack and you don't see it. So a lot of times there might be like slight little things that happen that are a big deal in the dog world, but we don't see it because it's really subtle body language type things, which goes to food. So when even with my personal dog, so I have 5 personal dogs, and then I'll have other training dogs coming and going. Food is a really important time, but it's all under my control. So that nobody gets to argue over their food because that's my job. So if anybody feels threatened, so I have 3 big dogs and 2 little beagles, and they all eat together, but I have like a set time for meal time, so food isn't sitting out, and that way they see that, okay, I'm the giver of food all good things, all resources, and everybody has to be nice and calm, and they sit for their dinner, and then I release them to eat, and I supervise so that if, Lana, my female, finishes first, she's not going over to someone else's bowl and trying to push them off or scrounge around. So I mediate that because I know that's going to happen, and that's just what dogs do is, okay, some of them might just walk away and be fine, but I don't allow there to be any competition, or I don't want the boys to feel threatened and feel like they have to stand up for their bowl. Does that make sense?
Sure.
So a good thing to practice is having set meal times. So you feed breakfast and then the bowls come up, and then you feed dinner and the bowls come up when dinner time is done. And then just kind of mediate, especially if you think it was something that had to do with food, because it could be that Chuck took his little piece of kibble and then dropped it. And then when food is eaten, sort of found on the ground, that's more of a primal instinct. So say that one tiny piece of kibble was there and Chuck was standing by it, but Maddie just walked by and smelled it.
Yeah.
That sort of creates this primal instinct, the hunt. Mm-hmm. So even though it's just kibble and they get that every day, it was more valuable because it was on the ground and there was another dog there, and I better get that. So it very well could have been something like that.
Okay.
But if you have set meal times, there's no chance for food to be out anywhere that you don't know about. So that kind of takes care of that problem.
So they eat at a certain time. So would you recommend then separating them? That's what I've been doing.
Well, what I would do is try and have them sit for their dinner or feed them their dinner together. If you're not comfortable with them side by side, just have them in the same room, and you're there to mediate. So if anything happens, mom's there to stand in and say, Maddie, or make Chuck stay away from her bowl. So if you see any type of competition rising, you can stop it, even if you just kind of sense it. If, say, Maddie makes little eyes and just kind of side eyes Chuck, you can step in right there and nip it in the bud. If you're not comfortable, if it feels like there is a big competition between them for food and you feel more comfortable feeding them in separate rooms, then that's okay. But I would just kind of gauge and see and make sure you just supervise mealtime a little bit better.
Okay.
And then the other thing to look at is just kind of, you don't want to be overly worried about their behavior, but just kind of observe them in their daily routine too, and see if it seems like one is competing for the others, whatever they have. So for example, if Chuck is getting petted and Maddie comes in and kind of pushes herself in, just make sure that you don't allow her to it's like siblings competing for something. You're gonna have Chuck have his time, and then when it's Maddie's turn to be petted, then she can be petted. So that's an example of just keep things even, and notice if there's, maybe Chuck's up on the couch and Maddie pushes him off, or things like that. So just kind of be aware of and mediate if you see anybody picking on the other.
Yeah, so if I am, because Maddie does that all the time. So if I am petting Chuck, she'll come and put her head underneath my hand.
Yeah, and that's rude. It's, hey, don't pay attention to him, pet me.
Okay.
But what we need to do as leaders is not in a mean way, but just kind of ignore Maddie and push her to the side and finish loving on Chuck, and then call Maddie over so she doesn't feel like she can just bust in whenever she wants to. Because that in a really subtle way, those things that she does are just kind of making her feel a little bit more powerful each time. I can get petted whenever I want to, and move Chuck out of the way. But that's also not to say, I know this is kind of confusing, but if you like to love on your dogs at the same time together, you should do that too. But just don't let the dogs determine what you're doing. So if Maddie comes in and Chuck is getting petted, just don't let her end the attention that you're giving to Chuck if you like snuggling them together. Because I snuggle all my dogs, but I don't let them push others out of the way.
Okay. And would you recommend when people are going through like something like this where you've got a large and then a small dog, should I get Maddie's crate back out and put her in the crate when we're not home just to protect Chuck? Or
you could do that, and that if you're seeing a lot of problems or you just don't trust, the crate is always a good thing to default to. So as long as she's had good exercise and food and water, and maybe give her something to stay busy with, like a chew toy that's safe to be left alone, like a bully stick or like a peanut butter Kong. Give her something to do in the crate if you're gone for a long time. But yes, if that makes you feel better and she hasn't earned that total trust of being out like that, then the crate is a great default.
Okay. Okay.
Because it's just, she's safe. You know that, you know exactly what she's getting into if she's in the crate. You know that Chuck isn't doing anything, and there's no wondering if they're going to fight or if there's something that they might get into.
Okay.
And then that's not forever. So as things go back to normal and you start to see, okay, it's fine, let's try again, then go back to that. And then you can always default back to the crate if you need to.
Okay, those are great tips. Well, thank you very much for being on the podcast, and we look forward to having you back.
Me too. I can talk about dogs all day.
Well, with 5, you have a lot of experience.
Yeah. And I didn't get there. I started with 2 dogs, and then the longer I trained, I think the more experience I got, and then I realized, I have some more skills. I can bring another dog in, and then I had to set a limit because it started to get crazy.
Yeah, I'm sure. You're going to need more land.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. We always appreciate your tips.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you for listening to Bark and Wag's 15-Minute Vet Talk. If you like what you just heard, we hope you'll pass along our web address, www.barkandwag.com, to your friends and other pet owners. Have a pressing question for a veterinarian? Ask your question at barkandwag.com under the podcast tab. This has been a KFR production. Join us next time for another edition of Bark and Wag's 15-Minute Vet Talk.